Last year, I did a podcast on the Mitford sisters that actually annoyed the Mitford Society so much that they actually banned me from any and all their events. And I then received a barrage of emails, messages asking me, are any of the Mitfords actually likable? And I think what I tried to do with that particular podcast was talk about the Mitford sisters in a very level, uniform kind of way without giving my opinions. I actually wanted you to form your own opinions onto with regards to whether they were good people or not. So because those emails keep coming in, I've decided to give you an update on the Mitfords and explore really whether any of them are actually likable or whether all of them are actually tarred with the same brush. So, hello and welcome to Rearview Mirror Chronicles. My name is Keith Hockton. I'm a public historian, author, and broadcaster. And if I'm being totally honest, someone with a wholesome fascination for the beautiful wreckage which became the British aristocracy. So today we're tackling a question that has kept dinner parties, book clubs, and Twitter threads in heated debate for decades. Do we dislike all the Mitfords? Or lurking somewhere among the fascists and prize chickens, is there anyone, who is genuinely likable? And look, I think this is a cracking question, really, because it gets right to the heart of why the Mitford sisters still fascinate and infuriate, I think, in equal measure. They're that rare family where every single member, from eldest to youngest, managed to carve out a little niche in the collective memory, sometimes celebrated, sometimes notorious. And public opinion about them swings like a weather vane. One minute you're charmed by Nancy's novels, and the next you're reeling at Diana's unrepentant politics. Sometimes you even find yourself loving and loathing the same sister almost in the same breath. To understand the Mitfords is to embrace contradiction in many ways. Glamour hand in hand with cruelty, dazzling wit with, I suppose, genuine danger, and affection with a sort of gleeful, aristocratic chaos, if you like. So let's wind the clock back just a little, and let's start with the setup, Aristocrats Unleashed. The Mitford sisters were born into the rarefied air of English high society. Their father, Lord Redesdale, was a throwback, if you like, a relic to Edwardian England, who hated foreigners, especially the French, distrusted books, and thought that educating girls was not just unnecessary, but positively improper. The 6 daughters, in order, Nancy, Pamela, Diana, Unity, Jessica, and Deborah, were left to run wild on the Oxfordshire estate, more or less unschooled, I suppose, inventing their own language, tormenting every governess brave enough to darken the door, and developing the sort of wild, vivid imaginations only pure boredom, vast privilege, and the daily jostle of sibling rivalry can actually produce. It's that fine concoction, that fine mix that produces a family of this stature. So there were no exams, no schedules, no real expectations, actually, beyond simply being Mitford girls. Just acres of parkland, a mountain of family legend, and a growing appetite for drama. And I think in the Mitford family, drama was never, ever in short supply. So who were the 6 sisters, saints and sinners all? Well, look, let's take them one by one, because honestly, each sister is a story unto herself. Nancy Mitford was born in 1904 and died in 1973. She was the eldest and the family chronicler. She wrote with a waspish wit. I have to say, she was very good, and most famously produced In the Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate. And Her books are gloriously biting portraits of her own family's world, upper class England at its silliest, most frivolous, and I think also its most fun. Her snobbery, however, was so flamboyant it became almost a kind of performance act. Yet beneath the sharpness, there was a secret: stubborn romanticism. Politically, Nancy was to the left of her sisters. She actually despised fascism, even reported Diana and unity to MI5 during the war, and she championed Free France. And you have to love her for all those things. And after the war, she ended up in Paris, eventually dying of Hodgkin's lymphoma. Still writing, still making jokes, still crucially never taking anything, I think, including herself, entirely seriously. Pamela Mitford was born in 1907 and died in 1994. Pamela was the family's mystery. If Nancy was the chronicler, Pamela was quite the one in muddy wellies. You know, she avoided the spotlight, she loved animals, and was happiest with a flock of chickens or a prize of Hereford bulls. She actually married the scientist Derek Jackson and then divorced him, and then spent decades living in rural peace with Giuditta Tomasi, an Italian horsewoman, in a partnership that kept the Mitfordologists speculating ever since. I don't think there's any mystery to that partnership. They were in a partnership in every sense of the word. There were no big political dramas, there were no showy scandals, just eggs and horses and the kind of steady contentment that, in the Mitford context, actually feels almost subversive. But it's not. But it feels that way. Diana Mitford is next. She was born in 1910 and died in 2003. And now the ice. Diana was absolutely the family beauty. She was dazzling, she was elegant, and as it turned out, she was also entirely ruthless. She married the Guinnesser, Brian Guinness, but left him with characteristic Mitford style for Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists, an incredibly evil organization. Their wedding actually took place in Joseph Goebbels' drawing room, with Hitler himself in attendance as a witness. During the war, Diana was interned for her politics, her children farmed out to relatives, and after the war, she never apologized, never recanted about what she'd done. She even denied the Holocaust on national radio and then entertained royalty and exiles in her Paris apartment. In Diana, I think charm and monstrousness existed very much side by side. Proof that you can actually be dazzling and deeply troubling at the same time. Next came Unity Valkyrie Mitford. Seriously. Unity was the most bizarre Mitford of all, which in this family is actually really saying something. Named after a Valkyrie, she was born in Swastika, Ontario. Honestly, you can't make this up. And not surprisingly, with the name of Valkyrie, being born in Swastika, she became obsessed with Hitler. And she met him more than 140 times and openly championed his cause. She was infamous during the lead up to World War II for her rabid anti-Semitism and her gleeful support for fascism. And when war came, she was in an apartment in Berlin that had been given to her by Hitler. And on that announcement, she took herself to the park and shot herself in the head with a pistol that had been given to her by Hitler. Miraculously, she survived, only to be returned to England, slightly brain damaged and fading quite quickly, but also under a cloud of suspicion. She was young and she was mostly forgotten, but there were questions that remained about her return. Why was she returned by Hitler in the first place? Why was she returned and then put into a maternity hospital? And the rumor that went round for many years and has since been buried was that she was actually carrying Hitler's love child. Then there was Jessica, nicknamed Decca Mitford. She was born in 1917 and died in 1996. Jessica, if anything, was actually Unity's mirror image. If Unity went hard right, Jessica went all in on the left. And she ended up running off with her cousin, a guy by the name of Esmond Romley, to fight for the anti-fascist cause in Spain in the mid-1930s. And she then emigrated to America, became a communist, joined the Communist Party, and then became a crusading journalist. She took on the Ku Klux Klan, she took on the funeral industry, she took on racism, and she fought poverty. Almost literally every establishment that she could find. Jessica, I think quite rightly, cut herself off from her fascist sisters, and she never looked back. And she built a formidable reputation as one of the great kind of muckraking journalists of her era. She actually suffered her own losses. Her first husband was killed during the war, and she lost 2 children at the same time. But she never ever lost her drive. Deborah Mitford was born in 1920 and died in 2014. She was last, but she was also the pragmatic one. She married the future Duke of Devonshire. She took on the mammoth task of running Chatsworth House and transformed it from a crumbling pile into a thriving business and the standing symbol, I have to say, of English heritage. You know, she loved livestock, she loved chickens, she had her own favorites. By all accounts, she had a good sense of humor and she loved a good joke. She lost 4 children, endured plenty of heartache, but actually outlasted all of her siblings. And by the end, Deborah was a national treasure. And if the other Mitfords were fireworks, I have to say she was probably the steady flame that never went out. And she added a lot of normalcy to that family. So the question then came up while I was even researching this, after doing that podcast last year, was why were they so hated? Why did I not like them even before I started my research? Why did the Mitfords annoy, infuriate, and even repel so many people? I think the answer is relatively simple. They were the walking, talking embodiment of everything that was infuriating and fascinating about the English upper class. They were self-assured. They were insulated, often heartbreakingly oblivious to their own absurdity, sometimes even to real human suffering. Diana and Unity in particular became symbols of upper-class scandal, glamorous Nazi sympathizers, laughing off atrocity, denying the evidence in their own eyes. Diana was still casting doubt on the Holocaust up until the 1980s. Unity, on the other hand, delighted in the spectacle of others' misery. These two were not just harmless eccentrics. Seriously, folks, they weren't. And I think sometimes, most times, they were actually genuinely dangerous to those outside their world. But it wasn't just the politics. Even the fans admit the sisters could be snobbish, cruel, and indifferent to those outside their world. And for years, their class actually sheltered them and protected them. Scandal, in a way, was very much entertainment, and charm became a sort of suit of armor. Worst of all, and I think this is the greatest travesty about the Mitford sisters, they mostly got away with it. So that's the sisters, but the rest of the clan, the parents and the brother. Tom was the only brother, and the parents, David Lord Redesdale and Sydney Lady Redesdale, they were a classic old curmudgeon of people that detested books and adored dogs and thought women should be decorative and quiet. Lord Redesdale is actually famous for saying that playing hockey gave women thick ankles. Let's be honest about this. He was a Hitler supporter before the war. He went and met with Hitler, and he flirted with Hitler's Germany in a very loose way. And then, of course, when war was declared, he swung back to red-faced patriotism, literally in 1939 as war was being declared. Sydney, meanwhile, stayed loyal to Hitler even as the bombs fell on London during the Blitz. She loved the man. And not surprisingly, their marriage collapsed under the strain. The sisters scattered politically. Tom, the golden boy, was also caught in the middle. He was educated at Eton and Oxford, and he admired Hitler's Germany. He went and also met with Hitler. But you know what? With classic Mitford logic, when he joined the war effort, he refused to fight the Germans in the war because he admired them so much, and instead asked if he could be sent to fight the Japanese. And for whatever reason, they agreed to let that happen. And sadly, he died in Burma weeks before the war ended, a tragic and pointless end to the family's last hope of a male heir. Sydney, the mother, died in 1963, still absolutely sure that supporting Hitler was the right thing to do. David died 5 years before, I imagine still completely baffled by his own children. And this sort of leads to a very strange afterlife, doesn't it? So why do we keep returning to the Mitfords? Why are we still enamored with them? Why do we still read their books, visit their houses? And if you're truly committed, take Mitford walking tours. And I think the answer is because they are the ultimate paradox. They're outrageously funny. Nancy's letters are they're quite a treat. Debo's anecdotes about the Queen and chickens are national treasures. They're always stylish, they're never dull, and they give us a look into what happens when you're born at the top and determined to live entirely on your own terms. But there's always a shadow for every laugh, a sting for every charm. The Mitfords are as much a warning as they are a delight. So to answer that question that I keep getting sent, were any of them likable? Sometimes yes. Nancy and Jessica could be warm, sharp, and I think also gloriously kind of self-aware. And they saw the absurdity of their own world and they relished it. Pamela and Deborah, especially Deborah, I think offer hope to anyone who prefers hens to headlines or just a good cup of tea to a political crusade. Diana and Unity, it's a stretch, folks, I have to say. Unless your ideal dinner guest enjoys a monologue on European fascism, these two were very nasty and very evil. But look, here's the point. The Mitfords weren't just spoiled posh girls. They were the full spectrum of 20th century Britain. They were fascists, they were communists, they were novelists, they were journalists, they were animal lover, they were eccentric, all bundled into one unforgettable, impossible family. You certainly can't love all of them, but somehow you can't quite look away. So do I hate all of the Mitfords? No, but you have to admit, a few of them make it remarkably easy. And that, dear listener, is the curious magic of the Mitfords. Proof that the British aristocracy, like the weather, is always a little more complicated than it first appears. Thanks for listening in, folks. Bye for now.